Hello. As some people may be aware, I'm a big fan of The Office, specifically the original British version from 2001 that was created and written by Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant. I've picked up some fairly interesting Office-related things over time, like this Chinese 3-DVD set in which 2 of the 3 discs actually contain the wrong TV show, and I also have a Taiwanese release of the first series which isn't on DVD, but rather the now obsolete video CD format. And I mean, if you aren't watching The Office on Taiwanese video CD, are you really watching it? But probably more impressively, I also own this, a genuine shooting script from the making of the first part of the Christmas specials, still properly bound with no missing pages, and it's in decently good nick despite being almost 20 years old by this point.
Oh yeah? You alright?
Obviously, this is just a really nice thing to own as a big fan of The Office, but also as a fan of the Ricky Gervais show on XFM with Stephen Merchant and Carl Pilkington, as they actually discussed these same Christmas special scripts being stolen and somehow leaked to the press in Series 3, Episode 5.
Some copies of The Office Christmas specials, scripts, got sent to the wrong address. Some woman.
But because this is a script from the actual filming of the show, and not a cleaned up, edited down and publicly released script that was put out after the fact, like the Series 1 and 2 script books for example, there's actually a fair amount of material in here that simply nobody from outside the production has ever heard before. Some lines, bits, and even a couple of entire scenes that are in the script but were then cut from part 1 of the Christmas special for one reason or another, and have just never seen the light of day since. I won't go over all of the dialogue changes, as the actors had a fair amount of freedom with their lines, as is seen in the various behind-the-scenes segments of the show, and so words were changed here and there between takes all the time. Plus there was quite a lot of changes to the ordering of scenes, with the first half of this episode actually being structured fairly differently to the script that I have. But here's some never-before-seen material that didn't make it out of this script, and a few other interesting bits that I picked out too.
Should we just cut that out? No, what? Put that bit in, cut the other stuff out.
While David says he's a motivator and entertainer in the opening scene of the Christmas special, here he describes himself as funny, brilliant, thoughtful, wise, a good laugh, an entertainer, a friend, a motivator, and an educator. Humble as ever.
I'm not a plonker.
During the initial introduction of the new character Anne, where it's shown that Tim really doesn't like her, a line was cut in which Tim would hand her some papers and almost tell her to shove them up her ass, before catching himself at the last minute. A funny bit, sure, but I actually much prefer the final episode's take on this scene, where it ends with Anne saying, "I couldn't breathe, I had to get out," while closing in on Tim's face. A perfect way of showing how Tim's feeling, not only at this current moment, but also in his life in general.
Timbo. Timbo.
Also, the script makes a point of really trying to emphasize how angry Tim is, being described as having his blood boiling at one point, whereas in the episode he comes across much more dejected and just generally done rather than explicitly angry, which I think suits him more. When Gareth and David are talking in what is now Gareth's office, and they bring up the fact that David recorded a single, David says the record label he founded is actually called Double Indemnity Records rather than Juxtaposition Records like in the final episode. This is actually pretty interesting because around a decade after this, Ricky went on to legitimately found a company named Juxtaposition Records, which I believe was used for some things relating to the David Brent Life on the Road film. Also, for David's If You Don't Know Me By Now music video, it's important to note that him wearing a white trilby was apparently optional.
Wow, because I had my own record label, Juxtaposition Records.
David's cleaning supply selling routine actually comes far later in the script than in the final episode, now happening after the conversation with the interviewer in his car, which makes sense I suppose. This was where he was actually driving to during that scene. But because this takes place after the revelation that David has had a failed musical career since The Office ended, there's now more joking about that included, as well as further insights into that failed musical career. He says he listened to so much bullshit in the music industry that he realised he'd rather sell high quality industrial cleaning products than records. That's a funny line of course, and it's also actually very similar to something that Ricky laughs about during an episode of the XFM radio show, Series 2 episode 35 to be exact, in which Ricky and Steve joke about former pop star David Van Day saying, "It's got to the point where I prefer to sell burgers than records."
Probably the same as David Van Day with that advert when he said it got to the point where I prefer to sell burgers than records.
No, you didn't.
That episode aired only a few months before this script is dated, so I say it's pretty likely that either that discussion on the radio show was the inspiration for this line, or if it was on their mind on the radio show because they'd been writing about it while making the Christmas specials. Either way, that's pretty fun. David comments that he gets lost in the moment writing songs, to which the interviewer replies that he didn't write If You Don't Know Me By Now because it was a cover. David then says he actually did write a B-side to the single, a track named Love Police, in which he was saying, saying there's no law and order in the feelings between people in relationships, and you can't report them every time they commit an emotional misdemeanor. Ever the wordsmith.
How much do you think you spent?
Roughly £42,000.
There was an entire scene cut that was to take place after the scene in which Gareth is chairing the meeting, in which Tim has a talking head segment where he compares Gareth to a little kid in an end-of-term play pretending to be the headmaster. Also, there was originally a second scene of Gareth's meeting too, with the second one involving nobody wanting to write down the minutes, and Tim making fun of Gareth by saying that the conversation about who will write the minutes needs to be in the minutes.
Don't include VAT. So that I did not officially hear that.
During David's celebrity appearance at Mumbo Jumbo's, when he initially walks on stage, the script has a line in which he channels Bruce Forsyth and says, "Nice to see you," but then nobody in the crowd replies with, "To see you nice," which David chalks up to it being before their time. Also, when filling out the online dating application, David forces Gareth to put down his occupation as senior management, despite him actually now being a travelling sales rep. There was also a part in which David had to specify how attractive he wanted his potential date to be, to which he tells Gareth to put down very attractive. Gareth says it's better to go for an absolute moose, she's thankful for anything, to which David replies with a line that'd be great out of context. "I don't want to go out with a moose." Then, during the celebrity blind date in which David keeps interrupting everything, Kim, the woman who's participating, was going to ask Bachelor number 3, that being Howard Brown from the Halifax adverts, what best sums you up, after saying what sums her up was the phrase "up for anything." Howard was then going to break into a rendition of the Tom Jones song Sex Bomb, complete with him dancing around the stage and everyone from the audience joining in. Wow, that definitely would have been something, alright. It probably would have gotten a better reaction from the crowd than David's Austin Powers impression anyway.
Who the fuck's that?
Who are you?
Part 1 ends after this club night sequence, but this script contains one final scene, a talking head segment from Tim, in which he sarcastically compares himself to Jesus and says he's got a few more months left to accomplish what Jesus did, but apparently by the age of 33. A nice little moment there that brings the episode back round to the Christmas theme, and is certainly a lot more down to earth than when David legitimately compared himself to Jesus in the second series.
Gotta go to Nazareth, please. And that's very much like me.
And that's all the major differences I could find between the final cut of the Christmas special part 1 and this script that I own. I can't lie, I find stuff like this kind of fascinating. The Office was such a huge show, and has become an incredibly important part of modern British comedy, and just entertainment in general, I suppose. That I feel like having what is essentially brand new material from it like this is a pretty big deal, at least to us people who probably spend a bit too much time thinking about comedies. Old, but new, Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant writing straight from the time period that a lot of people would probably consider to be their golden era. So yeah, a bit of a different video this one, but there you go. Almost 20 years later, a few more bits of comedy from The Office.
Back again.